The wailing, ghostly howls in the dead of night. That night, the air was still, and the moon hid faintly behind thick clouds. The village was shrouded in silence, broken only by the faint chirping of crickets from the roadside bushes. Hung, a young man in the village, was returning home late from a friend's house. He decided to take a shortcut through the small path by the cemetery to save time. The narrow path was flanked by rows of old bamboo trees swaying gently in the breeze, their rustling leaves whispering like murmurs. But this did not frighten Hung. He quickened his pace, assuring himself there was nothing to fear. Suddenly, from the distance, a howl pierced the air. At first, it was faint, like wind whistling through cracks, but it grew louder, more distinct, a mournful, prolonged wail. Hung froze in his tracks, cold sweat running down his spine. He glanced around, but the world around him remained eerily quiet, bathed in pale moonlight. Hung steeled his nerves and continued walking. But the howl came again, closer this time, clearer, as if it were right behind him. He whipped around, his eyes wide with fear. At the end of the narrow path, where the bamboo trees met to form a darkened canopy, something was standing there. It was a figure. No, it wasn't human. Its silhouette was unnaturally tall, its entire form shadowy and indistinct, except for two glowing red eyes that burned like embers in the night. The howl came again, and this time, Hung was certain it came from that figure. Terrified, Hung turned and ran, his feet barely touching the ground. The howling continued to chase him, growing louder and closer. As he reached the edge of the village, the faint light from oil lamps in the houses came into view, and suddenly the howling stopped. Hung never told anyone about what he saw, but from that night on, he refused to take the cemetery path at night. Villagers spoke of a tragic accident that had occurred on that path years ago. A family lost their lives when their horse-drawn cart overturned at a sharp bend. They believed the howling at night was the cries of their restless souls, trapped between the worlds of the living and the dead. Hung's story spread, and no one dared to venture through the cemetery path after dark. Yet sometimes, on calm, still nights, villagers could still hear the wailing howls coming from the direction of the cemetery, cold and haunting as ever.